Many have wondered, including myself, how come we have moved from one of the most articulated, intellectually brilliant, and educated president of the United States to an entrepreneur, a TV personality, and a novice politician who lacks the basics understanding of politics? One answer could be given to you: identity politics. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. This is author Germinal Van, and today I am presenting to you my fourth book entitled Reflection on Identity Politics. Here is why it divides more than it unites. Many people today believe that they deserve treatments based on the physical appearance or their cultural background. And that kind of mentality has brought us back to the age of tribalism. And the problem with tribalism is that you always found the wolves to blame. Today we talk about systematic racism. We talk about the patriarchy. We talk about illegal immigration. We talk about abortion. But all these issues that I've mentioned were created by a sense of I belong to a certain identity, therefore that's what I deserve. So what really stimulated me to write that book was to expose this fallacy. I wanted to explain to the reader from a philosophical and social theory standpoint how come we have moved from President Obama to President Trump. What didn't work? And as I said, it was identity politics. People refuse to criticize President Obama, but he's the one who actually generated that social division in the American social order. Today, people are distrustful from one another. There are two things that the Obama administration did. It combined identity politics and progressivism to pursue a political agenda instead of enhancing the common good, instead of enhancing the American people as a whole. Identity politics itself is not a political ideology. It is an idea, but it's not a political ideology because it does not have a philosophical backbone. It is more of a social movement, which totally makes sense. At first, identity politics was a good thing. Of course, as we say, every politics is identity politics. Identity politics was the element that enabled the United States to abolish slavery, to impose the 14th Amendment so that every citizen will have equal rights. It was the same identity politics that enabled women to vote with the 19th Amendment. So, identity politics promulgated the American social order to better ends. It was thanks to identity politics that we were able to establish the precedent of Brown v. Board of Education. So people, despite of their racial differences, could go to the same school and receive the same education. But then identity politics took a bad and wrong path that was enhanced by President Obama and his administration. The reason why I said that President Obama combined identity politics and progressivism is because initially progressivism is a political ideology that was meant for the working class, for the working man. As we say, the forgotten man, the one that the elites does not care about. The purpose of progressivism initially is to elevate the working man to a better social class, to alleviate his struggle, President Obama in 2009, January 20th, 2009, during his presidential inauguration, avowed that we are going to fundamentally change America. We are going to change America from within. And this is what happened. He used progressivism and implement identity politics into progressivism. So what happened was that people now were creating social groups to advance their self-interest instead of advancing the common good. President Obama passed many laws that would strictly and in fact benefit his political party, so the Democratic Party. He tried to control American society by changing the language through the implementation of political correctness. For instance, if you take Rosa's Law is the law that was designed for people with intellectual disabilities. Intellectual disabilities is a new word that was implemented by the Obama administration into American culture, instead of saying people who are mentally retarded. So President Obama wanted to control American society by political correctness, by the creation of social groups, because the more social group he created, the more those groups would be inclined to vote for the Democratic Party for the subsequent elections. And this is what happened. President Obama was one of the toughest presidents on immigration. No one talks about it. We even call him the deporter-in-chief. No one talks about it because it's President Obama. But President Trump wanted to basically continue the immigration policy of President Obama, and people call President Trump a racist. It is true that President Trump also used the zero tolerance policy, which is not socially acceptable to deal with immigration. There are other methods that could be used, but not the zero tolerance policy. And I explain all these phenomenon in my book. I explain how, for instance, Black Lives Matter, the Me Too movement, and the religious right are all using identity politics to further their self-interest, instead of trying to bring unity among the American people. For instance, the Black Lives Matter promotes more exclusion. Basically, for the Black Lives Matter, if you're not black and victim of racism, you cannot understand what it means to be black. You don't need to be a victim of racism always to know that you're black. With the Me Too movement, when a woman comes and says that she has been sexually abused, if you have your reservation about her statement, people will say, believe women. If you don't believe women, if you're a man, they will say that you're a sexist, a misogynistic person. If you're a woman, they will say that you're a traitor because you don't support the feminist cause. All this is identity politics that has been playing. And we see how the feminist movement has radicalized itself. We see how feminism, which is originally a philosophical thought that was meant for gender equality, has moved from gender equality to the search for power. And that it's called tribal feminism. So from philosophical feminism, we move to tribal feminism, where the feminists who seek power become the oppressor. The patriarchy is bad. All men are bad. They don't want us to have the same rights as them. Women already have rights in this country. Women in this country are the freest women on earth. A woman in this country cannot compare her struggle to a woman who lives in an Arab country like in Saudi Arabia. In Saudi Arabia, let me remind you that a woman was not allowed to drive until 2017. That itself tells a lot. In many third world countries, a woman cannot file a complaint for being groped or for being sexually abused. Here, a woman can do it instantly. So, people are very privileged, and they're using their identity to disrupt the social order for their own self-interest. And that is a selfish approach to advance in a society. Many groups has been formed. Now, what President Obama has done was that he promoted the group over the individual. So you see, for instance, many groups that were formed, like the LGBT group, which is of course a normal group of people who gathered based on the same sexual orientation. So basically it's the sexual orientation that brought them together, which is fine. But for them now to have a political voice in the political arena, the LGBT has veered from being just a group based on sexual orientation to a ethnic group. Sex is not an ethnicity. It has never been an ethnicity. But that's what the progressive movement has been doing, dismantling the social order by dismantling the individual. I talk about group rights in the book, saying that members in a group have rights, but the group itself doesn't have rights, because no one would bear the responsibility of bad actions. But an individual must. That's why an individual has rights, because if he messes up, he will be held accountable for his action. There are many things that I talk about in this book, ladies and gentlemen, and I cannot wait for you to get it and read it and understand the theory behind identity politics. The right also has not done good. If President Trump was able to get elected, it was because the working class American citizen felt forgotten by the elites. They did not feel concerned by the speeches of President Obama. Most of the people who voted for President Trump were liberals, and they switched to the Republican Party. There was a reason for that. It's because progressivism has changed. The roots of progressivism has changed. From defending the interests of the working man, progressivism started to simply defend all kind of people who are simply not white males. Now being a minority simply means you are not a white male Judeo-Christian person. So even if you're a white woman, you're a minority now. This is wrong. This is a distorted vision that the Obama administration has left in this country. And now President Trump has seized that opportunity to make it his own. President Trump also played on identity politics to advance his own movement. So now you have also whites playing the identity politics card. You have whites who have radicalized themselves. You have people like David Duke who support Trump because they felt like Trump was representing their cause. He was representing the cause of the white man, which is not necessarily the case. But that's how many white people felt because of the result of identity politics. And this is what I explain in my book. The book itself is 219 pages, and it is divided in 4 major parts with 10 chapters. The first chapter talks about the origins of identity politics. And the second chapter talks about identity politics as a movement. So the first part is basically about the origins of identity politics. The second part talks about the progressive agenda, how President Obama used identity politics to establish the progressive agenda on which the country would be run. The third part was about how identity politics played a substantial role in the 2016 election, which is basically the heart of the book. And the fourth part is about how can we do better? How can we be united as one single entity, as the American people? People talk about multiculturalism, but cultural pluralism and multiculturalism are not the same. And I talk about that in the book too. Multiculturalism aims to dismantle culture by saying that all cultures are equal, which is not true. Cultural pluralism, on the other hand, is about the fact that cultures are different and they can live together, they can coexist, they can cohabitate. And that's where the point is. The United States has to come back on track, socially speaking, because this identity politics is a very poisonous element of our social order. What makes the worth of an individual is not his identity. It is not his cultural background. What makes the worth of an individual is his skills, the content of his character, the competence that he has to achieve. That's what defines the value of an individual. Ladies and gentlemen, reflection on identity politics will be available on Saturday. It will be released tomorrow. It will be available on Saturday on Amazon.com. Whenever it's available, please go grab your book and enjoy the reading. From now on, I see you guys next time.